We don't get the music? Where's the music? How can we do this? Did you guys listen to that song in the city? Stevie Wonder, the words. That song is why we're here. Right? That song is why we're doing this panel. It is stunning. And it's about our children, it's about the future, it's about a vision for capitalism as it could be and as it should be.
Hey, Erica,
And yes.
I don't know if they can hear you, but we can't.
Can you guys hear me? All right. You guys can't hear me now?
I can't.
I'll turn to you when we're ready to go.
Mic up a little bit.
All right, mic up a little bit. This is glary, but it really is about the future. Some of you have heard me say that I think capitalism is beautiful. I think finance is poetry and magic if we do it right. When I say poetry, I really do mean it. And I'm thinking about the city. And being a New Yorker, I know a little something about the city, but I will tell you that these guys have forgotten more about cities than I will ever know. And so we are really privileged to have them here. That thing about poetry, I was thinking about Baudelaire. And he's kind of a bummer in terms of the approach to things. But Baudelaire said, "What a strange phenomenon we see in great cities. All we need to do is stroll down the street with our eyes open, and life swarms with innocent monsters." All right? Now that's really interesting. It's kind of a bummer, but the reality is we need to stroll down the street with our eyes open. We need to be observant. We need to think about the nexus of whether it's climate change and healthcare and productivity, climate change and education. These nexus issues are complex, and they are challenging, and they are daunting. But if we can get solutions scalably done, data-driven solutions and policies that allow us to save the cities, face it, within about 30 years, we're going to have 70% of the world's population, 7 billion people, are going to be in the cities. And those of us who are raising our families in the cities start to ask if it's worth it. Is it worth it? I come out here and I think, well, I should stay out here, period. It's really nice. Living in the city is tough. And are we getting it right? Can we get just enough? And so here we're going to talk about the cities. Cities are about building infrastructures that can deal with complexity, and water and garbage and food and health. Learning, diversity, creativity, and innovation comes out of cities. And so we have to get this right. Hubs of trade and finance, hubs of learning and education, engines of innovation to accelerate the progress for change and towards change. So what we're going to do in terms of this session, I'm going to ask each of our experts to self-introduce for 2 minutes. I don't have a cattle prod, but I used to at times. So I will ask you to keep it just 2 minutes, a quick self-introduction, and then most importantly, your priorities, all right? So a little bit about exactly what you do and your priorities, and then a little bit about if you had a dream for what would be perfect, an aspiration. Give us that too. All right, so Jerry, why don't you start?
Thank you, Erica, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jerry Tinianow. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for the City and County of Denver. And before I tell you my dream, I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for the great work you've been doing to bring our nation and our world to this place today. I've been working in this area for 40 years, since I was a teenager and first started working on these issues. And what's going on today at this conference and the group of people who are here and what you do, it's what we dreamed of 40 years ago. So of all the period within that 40 years, this is the best time right now. My mission as Chief Sustainability Officer is very clear and simple because I was given a 4-word agenda when I started by our mayor. And that 4-word agenda is scale and everybody plays. And by everybody plays, he meant that he wants every agency in city government, no matter what service it provides, to use sustainability as its basic business model. And scale is he wants to move big numbers. He does not want to do pilot projects or demonstration projects. He wants to move big numbers to protect the resources that our community depends on. So I have a lot of dreams that I could trot out, but I'm going to just run out one right now to give you an illustration of what we're talking about and to also show where these dreams intersect with innovative finance that you're all interested in. Denver recently entered into a partnership, a three-way partnership with the City of Austin and the Rocky Mountain Institute to change urban mobility at a fundamental level. And in the audience today is E.J. Clark-McCook, if you want to stand up for a moment, E.J., with the Rocky Mountain Institute. So you have about 2/3 of the partnership here today. And we are going to challenge the basic paradigm under which mobility works in urban areas, which is privately owned cars that are bought mainly for the worst case scenario, just in case transportation. And we want to replace that with just-in-time transportation, a system that we believe could remove about 80% of the vehicles, the private vehicles, from urban streets in about 15 years. There's five parts to it. Integrated mobility data, one application, one card for everything. Electrification of our fleets. Commuting on demand, eventually transportation on demand, but commuting on demand. You call for it, it picks you up, it drops you off where you need to be. And then in the longer term, driverless cars, I think, will be at the centerpiece. And finally, changes in land use to reflect all of this.
That's perfect. Urban mobility is the vision.
Yeah,
all right. We'll pick that as the aspiration.
That connects with this audience because it's based on the fundamental inefficiencies of the current paradigm, and where inefficiencies exist, profit can be made.
Basic analytics in the industrials industry, capacity utilization, we need to drive it higher. So Gil, self-introduce and the vision, the one aspiration.
Sure. Thanks, Erica. I'm Gil Friend. I'm Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Palo Alto, California, a small community in the San Francisco metro area. Like Jerry, I've been at this for a bit over 40 years. Cut my teeth with Buckminster Fuller's World Game in the early 1970s, and then co-founded Institute for Local Self-Reliance, worked in the governor's office in Jerry Brown's first term, and for most of the past 30 years have been doing strategic advisory with large corporations and cities, helping them embed sustainability as a strategic driver of business value, a way to drive, improve operating margins, drive innovation, reduce risk, and build brand, and really a lot of the stuff that you folks are figuring out how to put into practice in financial markets. So we've been doing that strategic work, and a couple of years ago I got the itch to shift from spending my life selling advice for a living to going inside a large organization and do what Jerry and others have done, just like get hands on the wheel and ass on the line to make something happen and shift in a large organization. The aspiration for me, as I think for a lot of you, is to transform the economy of an entire planet, this planet, and to do it in our lifetime. Specifically in the case of Palo Alto, the charge I got was a little less focused, Jerry, than you got from your mayor. They said, let's be the greenest city in the country or the world, which is a very vague aspiration. And more specifically, it's how do we use the incredible assets of Palo Alto, intellectual, financial, business assets, to both dramatically improve the quality of life right there in that town, and also be an inspiration and a beacon for other cities. Palo Alto has the advantage of being a very prominent international brand. Rightly or wrongly, it carries a lot of respect, and that's an asset that we can leverage. The one thing, in fact, is the one thing that Jerry just mentioned. We've been working on the same vision, not in the partnership with RMI and Austin, but in partnership with the Transportation Ministry of Finland and some others to look at how do we transform transportation in the Bay Area. For us, there's a very specific and concrete driver. Palo Alto has taken its electricity carbon neutral through our municipal utility. Our emissions are down about 33% against 1990 levels, which is pretty stunning. But if you look at what's left, it's 61% transportation. So we don't get to any significant greenhouse gas reductions without changing transportation. We can't do that at the scale of a 66,000 person city in a multi-million person metro area. So it has to be done as a regional coalition. So I won't go into detail because Jerry summarized it, I think, very accurately. Same logic, same elements.
So the modest vision to transform the global economy, and I think it's
and that's easier probably than transforming the transportation system of the Bay Area, which is the tough one.
Gil, let me interrupt you. Thank you for that. Let's stay in the intro section and let's get to CDP, who are fabulous. Chris, you guys have put out some tremendous work. Talk about what you're most proud of, what your day job is, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Erica, and thanks everyone for having us here. We're really pleased. I work at CDP, formerly known as the Carbon Disclosure Project, so I come at this from a slightly different perspective. We're a global NGO, and our basic mantra is that what gets measured gets managed, and we bear that out. Most of you probably are familiar with CDP on the corporate side. We ask large listed equity companies to disclose. We ask thousands of supply chain companies to disclose on behalf of large corporations as well as the U.S. government now. I'm here because we have a cities program, which you may not be familiar with. It's only a couple years old. It was funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies, and it's allowed us now globally to get to 308 cities responding to CDP. That's more than 70 in North America. And what we're doing with that information, I think, is really relevant for cities like Jerry's and Gill's, because we ask a set of questions that can then be used to benchmark and maybe help ascertain whether a city is becoming as green as it possibly could, or whether it's using all the ideas available from around the world. So in addition to the cities program, we also have a states and regions program now. 50 around the world, including many here in the US, are responding to CDP. We've got an emerging program that is going to be looking from the UK, but globally, at fundable ideas for investors with regard to financing opportunities in cities, and exploring the nexus of how that works between our corporate data and our cities data. So if you are affected by drought in California and you're a corporation, what are you saying about that in your disclosure, and how does that fit with what the city is saying, and do they need to be doing more together? Or if you are a utility or an aluminum producer in one of the North Carolina or South Carolina that's been affected by floods, what are the risks that you've identified that people should be thinking about when those physical risks actually come to bear? So for us, in terms of an aspirational goal, Erica, it is about disclosure. We want to find the most material relevant questions for investors to be using in their analysis of, for example, green municipal bonds and the fundamental credit analysis and the ESG factors, or really the E, which is what we focus on. We're the deep dive in the E of ESG. What are those factors that pertain to cities? So we want to continue our work with municipal bond originators, with investors and rating agencies. We did a white paper earlier this year with Breckenridge exploring our data and how it can be used in fundamental credit analysis for municipalities. And we want to double the number of disclosing cities, and we look for you and investors to help us make that case with the cities so that we can expand, deepen, and make this data set higher quality to really get to the heart of these issues and help cities like Denver and Powell to become the greenest they can.
So the aspiration is to offer decision-useful data to the world. Yeah. All right. We were going to talk a little bit about the barriers, the challenges to achieving the vision. But before we do that, Jerry, you mentioned scale. I love that word, scale, having impact at scale. Scale means different things to different people. In finance, I think scale means money making money on money at an accelerating rate. That's scale, right? That's good returns on investment. Just what does it mean to you to achieve scale? And I'll ask you each of that really quickly, because I think reaching scale means moving trillions of dollars from the mainstream of the capital markets towards a place where there's a systematic analysis of environmental, social, and governance factors. Again, money making money at an accelerating rate to finance global prosperity. That's scale to me. What is scale to each of you? And then we're going to get to challenges to achieving the vision.
What Mayor Hancock meant by scale is getting away from the kind of small-scale pilot project, boutique type things that is the place where a lot of urban sustainability programs start when they're beginning their conversation with their residents, into changes that move big numbers. And while this isn't a very precise formula, but we like to refer back to it as by way of example, we have something that we in my office call the 1% Club. It's an initiative that is going to make or create at least 1% of a particular change that we're looking for. 1 percentage point, I should say. So by way of example, one of our mobility goals in Denver is to reduce the percentage of commuting that's done by single occupant vehicle from the current 70% to 60%. So there's 10 percentage points in between there. And we're going to focus on solutions that can achieve by themselves at least one of those 10 points. So that gives you a sense of the scale that we're talking about as a government.
All right, and to get to scale, I am going to come back and ask you about organizational efficiency. So once you do something that works, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So we'll get there. But Gil, scale.
Well, we're in the middle of the Silicon Valley business environment where the first question that you're asked when you pitch a business idea is, great, will it scale? And what it means there is, will you be a billion-dollar company faster than the next guy did it? That's one way of thinking about scale. Mine is more of, well, it's to move the needle significantly, as Jerry said, to have a material impact on the issues that we're trying to address, and to do it with broad inclusivity, to have it affect or be available to a very wide percentage of our population and the populations around us. One of the things that we're doing on that, for example, is in the early stages of developing a cool block program to build neighborhood by neighborhood, block by block coalitions of neighbors with the goal of initially getting 25% of the community engaged, working neighbor to neighbor to bring their own footprints down 25%. So it's a different kind of scale. There's the scale of the rapid large growth, and there's the scale of the federated small, more of a horizontal scale that's enabled by internet technologies and others to do things in flat, broad organizations that could have the needle-moving impact that we traditionally thought of only large organizations being able to do.
That's cool. Chris, anything on scale?
Yeah, so for us, scale is about disclosure. Last year, we asked 1,000 cities globally to respond, and 308 did. That's 30% disclosure rate. So we want more disclosure, but beyond that, we want quality disclosure. We want decision-useful information, and specifically with regard to cities, we capture a lot of information in there that can be very useful and will serve as examples for others, inspiration for others. We have a section on opportunities where New York City, as well as New York State, we ask cities and states, can talk about the different things they're doing, whether it's the Green Bank at the state level or the New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation at the city level, that are each respectively leveraging their capital in public-private partnerships to enable hundreds of millions of dollars of investment in specifically energy efficiency projects on the one hand, but also clean energy on the state level. So I think for us, it's about the disclosure, the quality of the disclosure, decision-useful information, and then helping use that information to educate other cities to help serve as examples. We are participating in the Green Municipal Bond Coalition, sponsored by the Climate Bonds Initiative, in partnership with some of the organizations that are here today, including As You Sow, Ceres, ICLEI, C40, and others, to use that collective convening power to help educate cities beyond the leaders that are on the DS, but get all of them participating and get to the scale that we really need.
Yeah. And to have, to have innovation, we've had a lot of invention, we've had a lot, but to have disclosures that are high quality and everywhere, to make information democratized so that we can have appropriate forecasts and real risk-adjusted returns. I mean, that is beautiful. Thank you for that. So let's dig in a little bit to the barriers. So the projects, the initiatives that you've seen work, all right, what are the barriers that don't allow you to scale those? If each of you would make a comment on that. So the real blocking factors, bottlenecks. Who wants to go? Gil, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I think, there are a number of them. One is simply inertia. Habitual ways of doing things, habitual ways of thinking. One of the things that's really struck me in my early months in Palo Alto is just the level of awareness of solutions. People in city government, I think in general, and certainly in ours, are very overcommitted, swamped with the work they do, under-resourced, and they have some very real near-term tasks. I mean, Public Works is running the roads and has to fill the potholes. The municipal utility, as vast and progressive as it is, has a fundamental commitment to deliver safe, reliable, economical power tomorrow. And thinking about 10 and 20 years is hard for them to do just in terms of bandwidth as well as habits of thought. I was very surprised at how little attention our staff is paying to what other cities and frankly what other companies are doing. I've always found in my corporate consulting work that either quantitative benchmarking or the examples of stories. Did you realize, that Diageo met their 2015 climate goals in 2012 at a profit? That kind of story, in my experience, opens up thinking. Certainly in my corporate clients, within city bureaucracy, it hasn't had that kind of power. People say, oh, no, that's not like us. That's a company, we're a city. Well, they have buildings, vehicles, people, pipes, lights, machines, computers, very similar at a functional level, but the thinking was that it's very different. We're unique. The city habitually doesn't benchmark. This is part of the downside of being a great brand. They think they're ahead on everything, not necessarily. At a functional level, this is a siloed bureaucracy. Carves problems into pieces, deals with them in very short time frames. We had a city council meeting a few weeks ago talking about the comprehensive plan, general plan that the city is rebuilding now, 15-year plan that's recreated on that interval. And we were at a council meeting talking about the housing element, and someone talked about transportation, kind of in the direction that Jerry was going about mobility, and one of the council members said, no, wait, we're talking about housing today, we'll talk about transportation another time. That's the heart of the problem, because those two are inextricably connected. Land form drives transportation demand. Transportation capacity affects housing prices. You can't talk about them separately. The organization is designed to not talk about them together. So I think there's a barrier there in being able to find cross-sectoral, cross-departmental synergies so we can solve whole problems, not nibble at pieces of problems.
So before we go to more barriers, Jerry, this is an issue of organizational effectiveness and governance. And so how do you build in, I'm a little surprised to hear that there's not that much benchmarking. So how do you start to do the benchmarking, think about incentivization, think about accountability? So governance of a city, the way we would think about governance of a private company.
I think there's two techniques that we've used to try to address this. And this is my first job in government after 32 years in the private sector. And I discovered that there seem to be two types of municipal employees. The first type, which Gil kind of alluded to, you lay out your program and they say, oh my God, I'm X years away from retirement and you want me to do what? Because it's a change in the way they've been doing business.
And a risk.
And then there's another group that says, oh my God, I'm X years away from retirement and I'm finally going to get to work on something meaningful. And those people are out there. So part of what we've been doing is finding them, locating them, working our way down to the middle management, finding them and then elevating them, encouraging them, giving them recognition. And we also involve ourselves in the hiring process. So when those middle management positions open up, we try to work with the agencies to be involved in hiring the people so that we have allies. And then the second thing is we are institutionalizing cross-agency discussion. We created something called the Sustainability Implementation Committee, which consists of representatives from the 12 agencies most seriously and significantly involved in sustainability. Remember, the mayor wants all of them to be doing it, but some do more than others. So those 12 are now meeting on a regular basis to discuss these common issues across agency lines, which never existed in our city before. And I'll tell you, one of the things where we're seeing the most discussion now is about the budget. Because right now they're all competing for a limited budget pool, and we're trying to show them a different way where they can work together and also consider new methods like the innovative finance tools that so many in this room bring to this conference.
Okay, we're going to get there to the
Let me
budget.
just add to that too. Similarly, we have what we call a sustainability board. It's the directors of 12 departments, similar agenda. We have a green team, which is a more staff-level organization of 60 to 100 people who meet on a regular basis and share concerns on these things, but from my perspective, become my eyes and ears throughout the organization. You can see opportunities that I won't see and that won't filter up to me. We have started to focus a bunch of effort on building sustainability values into the procurement system. So to move from an environmentally preferable policy, which we've had for 8 or 9 years, that says when you can buy the greener thing, if you can cost justify it within a certain margin of cost, and now the policy is default to green. Electric vehicles first. If those don't work, if you have range requirements, those don't work, write a justification, you'll get the exception. But now the rule is green and the exception is not, instead of the other way around. To the types of employees that Jerry spoke about, I want to be clear that I don't want to give the wrong impression of the organization, because there's also a lot of innovation and drive there. Our development services director, the guy who does the building permits, came in a few years ago and found that it took easily 9 months to get a permit to put solar on your rooftop. So the city's got a commitment to solar. It takes 9 months to get a permit. A lot of money in town. Solar providers came to town, walked around, and left, because there was just no way to do business in that permit environment. Peter Pernijot applied lean management principles and took that down from 9 months to 1 month to 1 week to 1 day to over-the-counter. Problem gone. So that kind of drive is there as well. Our Chief Information Officer, Jonathan Reichenthal, is a global leader in the open data movement. So you mentioned that before. The city's got a policy commitment to open data, not just because of the government transparency rules in California, but because we know that's the way to fuel innovation.
Just an observation. Earlier we mentioned inclusivity, which is so critical to cities. Sometimes I wonder, we always default to that word green, and I have to admit, I try to not use the word green because it can be divisive and politicized. So just generally speaking, I wonder if we can find more inclusive language than that particular word. But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. Chris, we were talking about organizational effectiveness and barriers. Let's go to that.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, in terms, just to your point on the political barriers, we do find that when we talk to cities sometimes, there's a reluctance at the staff level to take the step of reporting to CDP because there might be uncertainty due to an impending election, or they're not sure how certain politicians might take that. We give them the option of reporting privately, which can help in some cases, but that's a real issue, especially in certain regions of the country. But then in terms of benchmarking, I wanted to talk about the barriers there. Certainly something that we've observed, and we're consistently asked, especially by investors, about on the energy efficiency side, things that can be used to benchmark energy efficiency, energy use at the buildings level. And so one of the priorities that we've undertaken is to participate in the City Energy Project. This is a group of 10 cities across the U.S., some of whom have energy reporting requirements for certain types of building stock, and become the reporting platform for that information so that we can start to really measure the effectiveness of the policies and share some of that data so that it can enable more of even more innovative financial products such as those we've seen coming to market lately, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit later.
Actually, let's go to products and tools and examples. So let's talk about direct emissions. All right. So for cities, if in order, it's heating and cooling, it's transportation, it's lighting. So in terms of examples of projects related to any of those, again, if those are your priorities, because in terms of emissions, I guess they are, but projects and tools that have been great successes, maybe each give examples.
Sure. Well, the reason that Palo Alto's emissions have dropped so significantly is that we now deliver carbon neutral electricity to all of our customers. It came out of a community initiative that pushed for a voluntary program to enable customers to voluntarily offset the emissions associated with their electricity. Electricity mixed with hydroelectric, fossil fuel, and renewables. Voluntary program rose to participation of more than 20% of the city, at which point the council said, let's just offset all of this. So as a general fund expenditure to offset all the carbon, and do that not as a solution but as a bridge, the start of a 4-year program to take all the fossil fuel out of our portfolio, which will be done by 2017. At that point, it'll be renewables and hydro, period, in the electrical mix, which A, is cool, but B, opens up another possibility. I said before that road transportation is 61% of our footprint currently. 25% of it is natural gas. So we're looking at fuel switching, but in a different way than most cities. Eastern cities tend to be looking at fuel switching from coal to natural gas as a less carbon-intensive fuel. We're looking at switching from natural gas to electricity, which is carbon neutral. So that means looking at everything from water heating, space heating, and cooking in some vehicles across the city and transiting that out of natural gas and into electricity. Again, we're beginning with a voluntary program with the citizens, but we're looking at doing a more comprehensive program that might include an innovation of local carbon offsets. Instead of buying offsets that produce projects somewhere else, what about investing that money in projects in Palo Alto and perhaps in neighboring communities like East Palo Alto, and starting to build a self-priming pump to drive that innovation. It's one of a number of examples of new financial instruments that we're looking at to provide the bridge between current resources and mechanisms and where we think the value lies. It's a difficult bridge for a city to build. It's one of the reasons we wanted to create this panel to talk with all of you about how do we innovate to meet the particular capital and finance needs of cities to drive these changes.
You use the word cool. It is.
The word what?
You use the word cool. It is very cool.
It is very cool.
Hold this thought. I'm going to ask you some examples of really cool, sustainable design that come out of the cities of the world and why they are so cool and why they can be incredibly progressive in terms of our mission. But Jerry, let's stick with the issue of tools, initiatives that have worked, and how.
Yeah, I can provide an example of a success, something that we hold out as a success from the pre-scale period, and then show what we would need to do to take it to scale. We are using performance-based contracting to increase the energy efficiency and add renewable energy to a number of our city buildings, and we've done really well on that. We were one of the first cities to sign on to President Obama's Better Buildings Challenge. We had already increased the efficiency of our city buildings per square foot by 20%. We agreed to increase it by another 20%. We're ahead of schedule on that. And so by all of the kind of pre-scale measurements, the kind of sustainability 101 or 1.0 that cities used to do, that was a big success. But let's face it, our city buildings use probably 1% of all of the energy in the city. So at a community level, it's not going to produce scale. The real question and what we're thinking about now, it's not an original idea with us, but we're among the first to discuss it, is could we do performance-based contracting on a community basis? In other words, can you take the theory of it, which is you've got an outside consultant that looks at your energy-consuming systems, identifies opportunities for savings, quantifies the dollar value of that, and then advances the funds and guarantees the savings. Couldn't you do that on a community-wide basis? And that's why we're here. That's one of the reasons we organized this panel, because we want to work with innovative financiers out there who are interested in exploring models like this. That's where you go from the success of a city building by building, city government office building program to community-wide. That's the next step we need to take in order to get to scale.
I suspect the performance-based contracting is going to go to the issues of organizational ability to do that. More complex there.
We're doing a bit of that. Doing a bit of that through our utilities. The mic on? Yeah. Doing a bit of that through our utility, which has in the last couple of years taken its energy efficiency incentive programs into a performance contracting framework. We put out an RFP and asked for companies to step forward and basically offer kilowatt hours per dollar of spend reduction. The challenge there is that we're reducing demand 0.5% to 1% per year, and to get to the kind of transformation goals that we're talking about, if you want to think about a climate neutral city, which is one of the potential goals we're looking at, you're going to need to see 3, 4, 5, 6% per year reductions. So it's going to take a different mechanism to get there. This is probably one of them, which outsources the expertise, the capital, and the accountability for driving those results.
So, Chris, in terms of successes, I understand that there are 3 cities in America that are completely run on renewables. I think I read it in a CDP report somewhere. So if we've got Aspen, Colorado, we've got Burlington, Vermont, what else?
Lancaster, California.
Is it Lancaster?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
That's a very exciting development.
These
Renewable,
are
100% renewable.
100% renewable electricity.
100% renewable electricity.
Not yet 100% renewable energy, which is what we're starting to grapple with. How do we do that?
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? Just give us examples.
Well,
Success.
that's a really exciting example of the kind of information that you can find in the disclosure, right? So while we capture the quantitative information in terms of carbon accounting and emissions, there's also a rich trove of information in there with regard to qualitative ideas on what cities are doing. And I was going to stay with the example on the financing side of a couple of leading cities. One of whom is Toronto in Canada, who has an affiliate called the Toronto Atmospheric Fund that just, I think it was today or yesterday, was nominated for an award. They're in the running for an award nominated by C40, Mayor Bloomberg's organization, that'll be given in Paris. They funded years ago essentially an affiliate of the city to do a lot of energy efficiency finance work. And now they've almost spun that off, although they remain an investor, and they're doing quite a bit of work in terms of enabling energy efficiency work in the city. There are other examples, I think, of the way that cities can demonstrate that they're taking a leadership step in providing financing. In Cincinnati as well, there's an organization that actually created what they packaged as an impact investment. So they can market it to foundations that are moving towards that type of strategy. But at its heart, it's essentially a loan related to energy efficiency. So there are different ways that this information can be discovered through the disclosure and then used as examples for other cities.
So that brings us back to design and what's cool. So Gil, tell us some examples of sustainable design that really blow you away in the world's cities.
Well, I think the permit transformation that we did around solar is an example of sustainable design and something that's cool. But let's talk about buildings for a moment. In my first couple of months, I talked with my sustainability board about net zero energy buildings that use no more energy than what they gather and produce from ambient renewable resources. One of my directors said, net zero buildings, that's impossible. Well, she didn't know. And I said, here's actually a list of 41 of them in the Bay Area that are there and operating. She said, oh, didn't know that. Good, check that. She said, but they're by far too expensive to build, because everybody assumes that better, greener, if you'll permit me, more sustainable, more efficient buildings are going to cost more. In fact, they don't. In fact, none of these 41 buildings cost a dime more to build than a comparable traditional commercial building. She said, oh, really surprised, but the developers will never let you do it. And I said, well, no, if they think it's going to cost them money, lose them revenue, they will not, and they shouldn't let me do it. But if they think it's going to make them more money, get them to occupancy faster, get them higher rents, larger margins, they're going to be our best allies. 6 months later, this same person who said, I don't know, we'll see about that, I'm not sure if I believe you, came back to City Council and said, as we are building out our comprehensive plan, we're looking at 4 alternatives for the environmental impact report. Business as usual, which always has to be one of them, traditional growth controls, an alternative growth control, and this new idea she said that we're thinking about, we're not sure what to call it, maybe it's a zero option in which you could build anything you wanted in 6 districts of the city as long as you generated no energy demand, no new water demand, no new carbon emissions, and no transportation impact. So there's an interesting piece of design from somebody who 6 months before had been very skeptical but took these ideas and metabolized them and came out with something frankly better than I could have thought of or better than she could have thought of. The interaction of our 2 different points of view drove an innovation that hasn't been adopted yet but is working its way through the discussion in the policy process and is a great example of performance contracting. Most building regulation and zoning regulation is prescriptive. You can only build this high, you have to have this floor area ratio, you can use these materials or not, you have to be LEED certified or not. This is saying, let's create a bubble bounded by these constraints of no impact, and within that bubble invite people to be as creative as they can possibly be and innovate in ways that a normal regulatory regime wouldn't enable them to do.
See, this is so beautiful, because what we can do is make what appears to be impossible possible, with intentionality, with impact. I'm just thinking back another Baudelaire quote: evil is done without effort, naturally. It's the product of fate. Just let things happen and say it can't be done. And Baudelaire also said that good is always the product of art, and good has to be designed, and we can do that. So thank you for giving us that. Jerry, do you want to talk about design?
Yeah, the example I used in my introductory remarks of the partnership that we're working on with Rocky Mountain Institute in Austin is based, as I said, on the current inefficiency of the car-based transportation system. We use these very expensive vehicles that generally sit there most of the day unused, and they take up 5 parking spaces for each car. They're energy-wise very inefficient. They're dangerous. They're dirty, and so forth. It costs about 60 cents a mile to run them. There's an alternative system that we're working on developing that could reduce the cost as low as 20 cents a mile. So there's 40 cents per mile of savings that are there, which to us is a financing opportunity. And how would it work in terms of innovative financing in the city? Well, the financing would be private. We could, in theory, put all of the infrastructure in place, but we're a city, so we have a bond limit. We have an upper limit to the amount that we can borrow, and we just can't go beyond that. But what we would offer to a financier is cooperation with the city to make the changes in our legal system to accommodate that new system. If you rear-end a driverless car, how do you exchange insurance information with the driver? There's a lot of issues like that we would have to work with. We can do that. And we can also make the physical changes in the city that would accommodate this new system. You would need a lot fewer parking places, but you would need a lot more spaces for vehicles to pull up and pick up and drop off. So the dollars are there to make this system work, but to really provide the assurances I think that investors need, you need the cooperation of the city up front, rather than trying to put the investment together and then go to the city after the fact.
So stay with that. In terms of, traditionally, how does it work? Which comes first? You get the project and the initiative, and then you go get the financing? Or can you switch it, since we know that there's, huge pools of money ready to be invested? Can you go to the investors first, see what they want to invest in, and then do the project and the initiative? Can that work?
I don't think you choose between having one first and one second. I think you do them both at the same time. By involving both interest groups, the investors and the city, in the discussions from the beginning. And that's really what we're putting together in this initiative in Austin and Denver. We're bringing all of these parties together at the beginning to talk about what's necessary in each sector to make that happen. And that's, to me, is innovation, because it hasn't really happened before. Certainly the transition, the last time we did a fuel switch in mobility from hay to petroleum, we didn't have anything like that. We didn't really need to, but now we do, because we have such a massive structure that's already been created. We're certainly not going to force anyone to change, but we do need to create a new alternative that's much more attractive, affordable, safe, and clean. And we can only do that by working in partnership with each other from the beginning.
Good. And the investors are going to insist that we have the appropriate measures and metrics, and they're comparable and projectable. So how do you design the appropriate metrics?
Well, that's a great point. I was going to bring up some examples that we have from the qualitative disclosure to CDP from 3 different cities, kind of getting to this point. One was from Atlanta, and the Georgia Congress passed a bill, and this is described in the disclosure to CDP, that will allow the Atlanta Beltline, sort of their green belt, if you're familiar with it, to use public-private partnerships to finance and build a wide variety of projects along the 22-mile loop, including things like hiking trails, sidewalks, streetscaping, bike lanes, and transit facilities. So there it would seem as an example where the state acted first, likely the city in cooperation. Others describe, for example, in Cleveland, hopes to attract finance to do things, and describe projects that perhaps are already being developed in the private sector that they hope to have a role in. In Cleveland, they talk about energy-related projects, an offshore wind pilot program off the coast of Lake Erie, and also industrial and commercial energy efficiency projects. And in Yonkers, which has adopted more stringent green building standards, they also have this incredible need to invest in their schools and the infrastructure. So it's sort of competing demands, if you will, and they're looking for public-private partnerships. And so they list that in their disclosure as an opportunity, because we ask about opportunities, as I said, and we hope to bring that together in some sort of format that's going to your point about metrics and et cetera, allow investors to identify things that could be interesting investing opportunities.
I want to go back to the issue of where the money comes from. So, Gil, I heard a stat that it's less than 1% of pension assets that are invested in infrastructure, right? So we see that the pension funds seem to be reluctant. I don't know if it's about why that is, but it doesn't seem to make sense. So where does the money come from? Why is it not coming from pension money? Why is it not coming from sovereign wealth? How do we measure impact and success to get more money flowing to infrastructure?
On the energy efficiency side, I know that people have talked for years about the low-hanging fruit that represents, and before you do anything else, you should look at energy efficiency. But on the other hand, you don't necessarily see the dollars flowing into it. But on the other hand, you see new investment shops like Jewel Assets coming on board that are looking to do projects like that, and you see innovative financial arrangements that are using government entities in partnership with private ones. So in Pennsylvania, the state had originated quite a few energy efficiency loans, and to sort of leverage that, they've worked with Renew Financial and Citigroup to do a takeout in the form of a ABS transaction. And it's kind of the first of its kind, and they really hope that this will increase. I believe Calvert took out the entire first tranche of that. They're not an asset owner like you said, but maybe these will serve as examples for asset owners, to start to pay attention to.
All right. So, Gil, in terms of getting giant pools moving faster, how?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ideas, Gil?
Well, I think those are some good examples, and you think given what we've been saying the last few minutes, there are at least three different roles that a city can play here. A city can be a provider of services. It can put up its own money and deliver results. Paving streets would be a very clear example. It can be a provisioner of services, setting the rules within which something happens and offering an invitation, like in performance contracting. Here's a market. Here's a set of performance goals. Here's some parameters. Let's invite private players in to deliver those services. And it can be a convener. It can invite the conversation. This is back to your point about design and what Jerry was talking about. Bring together multiple stakeholders and either say, here's what we need, potentially, or maybe even more richly, let's talk together about what we all need. City government, citizens, stakeholders, local businesses, financiers, and providers to say, how do we design together a system that meets all of our needs? I mean, design is basically a process of identifying needs, identifying resources, and figuring out how do you assemble those resources to meet those needs.
Gil, sorry to interrupt, but I love your point about the corporate partnerships, because that is one of the biggest. We just had a big workshop in Charlotte, North Carolina. We had 32 cities from across the U.S. there, and one of the biggest pieces of feedback we got is that nexus between the corporate and the city. Frankly, a lot of the sustainability professionals at the cities, even though they know a large corporation might be headquartered in their city, don't know who to call. So they're looking to us to help enable that conversation, to bring them together to do exactly what you're talking about. That's exciting.
Yeah, it's really key. And sustainability fundamentally is a conversation about design. We have lots of other ways of talking about it, but we're trying to design product systems, organizations, financing mechanisms, policies that can do a better job of addressing the concerns that we have and the needs that we're trying to meet.
It's about design and about long-term thinking and about education. Jerry?
And I'm going to bring this issue much, much closer to home, namely the next room over from here. Because how many cities did you see exhibiting in that exhibit hall? How many cities do you see bringing their green products to this conference, which is so logical, obviously, to bring it here, and yet it hasn't happened because we're just not used to talking to the investment community. We talk to the investment community when we're doing a conventional bond issuance or when we want to place our pension funds or something. But in terms of sustainability, people like me and Gil have not typically talked directly to the investment community, and we're starting to do it now. Just last week, Gil and I led a session at the Urban Sustainability Directors Network where we were teaching other urban sustainability directors around the country the basics of reaching out to the investment community. So the conversation is starting now, and we're very grateful to SRI for doing this session because it's allowed us to reach out to you and start planting these seeds of possibilities that we could collaborate on, bringing finance together with the large-scale changes that we need to make in our cities.
And this confluence of different worlds is an enormously powerful opportunity. It's not just cities not talking to the financial world, or more importantly, to this financial world. Cities and corporates not talking together. about what they can do together. Jerry and I think, are unique among the sustainability directors that we have this private sector and public sector background. But this is traditionally what cities have been. How did cities form? Cities formed at the confluence of trade routes, or at the confluence of rivers, at a place where people from different tribes or communities could meet together and ostensibly to trade, but they're not just trading beads, they're trading ideas and aspirations and food and families. And that richness of interchange, the place where different ecosystems meet, is a powerfully rich territory. That's what cities fundamentally are. And we're talking here about taking on that function much more explicitly and saying, what are the worlds that we want to bring together? Worlds of cities, sustainability, impact financing, corporate innovation, very interesting territory. And what we need is, I just pulled out from my little notes an observation that Henry Ford, noted progressive, shared with us more than 100 years ago. He said, I'm looking for a lot of people who have an infinite capacity to not know what can't be done.
That's beautiful. That is beautiful. And this is why, you guys are making me even more of an optimist. Let's talk about one more issue, and then I'm going to ask you for a quick speed dating round of what pisses you off. But one more question about education. So cities, diversity, creativity, productivity, that's the hub, right? So we do have a question. There's one question that whoever wrote it right like an animal, and I can't read it, I apologize. But Gil and Jerry, my children are learning very good penmanship these days. It's important. Gil and Jerry, have Denver and Palo Alto reached out to your overlapping school districts to expand your initiatives? Education. And by the way, we're all talking about financial literacy when it comes to speaking to the investment community. It's a different language. The language of sustainability and the language of finance need to come together, but it is education. So that question from the audience for you guys, overlapping school districts, how do you educate the cities?
In Denver, we've worked with the Denver Public Schools on two of our resource areas. One, we actually have a health goal. We're one of the few cities that actually treats health as a resource, and it's part of our sustainability program, not as an outcome, which is the traditional way it's treated, but as an actual resource. And specifically, our community goal is to increase healthy weight among children from the current 69% of children to 74% by 2020. So we do work a lot with the schools on the meals that they deliver, on the physical activity that they encourage, including safe routes to school. And our mayor, one of his scale programs was he introduced the My Denver card, which makes participation, entry into our city rec centers free for every school-age child in Denver. Every school-age child in Denver is now able to go to our rec centers for free. So that's scale. And then also, another one of our resource areas, food. We're among the tactics we used is an institutional purchasing approach, and obviously your public schools are a big institution that can influence the local food market, so we also work closely with our schools on that.
Thank you. Gil, anything to add on education?
Some similar approaches. The Joint City Schools Committee will be talking together next week, looking at ways that we can collaborate. Food, transportation. The Safe Routes to School program is a great example. We've been putting in a lot of effort into that over the last few years. And now our bicycle commute rate for high school is 44%. Kind of staggering. And, great for the sustainability reasons, but also terrific for the kids' health. Imagine high school students having their mom say, honey, I'm going by the school this morning. Can I give you a ride to school? And the kid says, no, Mom, I'd rather bike. I don't want to ride. What excites me about that is that this is formative experience for young people that will affect them throughout their entire lives. And this will affect what they think about, how they see things, what opportunities they pay attention to.
Okay. And by the way, I owe whoever wrote this question for Jerry an apology. Your writing is fine. My vision is crap. So, last quick question. I don't mean to be rude, but what really pisses you off? Just in terms of knowing that we can make progress, but for some reason we don't. And whoever wants to start, just a quick question, because we're going to try to break down those barriers and, work together. So,
I mentioned the political aspect, I guess. That can be frustrating at times. Utilities are so closely connected with cities, and in many cases, it's great that the cities own the utilities, right? And I think that should and could be a natural way for. I know Boulder, for example, is going through a whole thing so they can take back their utility. But I think that the political aspects that get in the way of being able to really help do something that's going to benefit everybody can be probably the thing that pisses me off the most.
So politicizing things that frankly shouldn't be political, that should be pragmatic, pisses me off too. Gil?
One of our assistant city managers said to me last week, he said, most of the directors, the other department directors that you're dealing with, spend most of their time putting out fires. These are brilliant people, career professionals, extremely accomplished, very dedicated. They care a lot about the things that we're doing, and they're spending their life putting out fires. It's very hard to find a venue in which we can think long-term, where we can step back and relax and get away from the day-to-day concerns and look at these intersections. And I'm enormously grateful to the city because they created my position to try to do that, try to help the city do that. And man, it's tough. Just given the constraints and the reality and the resource limitations and that load of things that have to be fixed tomorrow. So that frustrates me. And personal challenge for me in that is understanding the cadence, the planning cycles, and the time trajectories in the organization, which are much longer than I think they need to be. And what pisses me off is that they're less predictable than I think they should be. Oh, didn't you know that you needed to submit that last week? Nope, didn't know.
Yeah.
And if you miss those kind of windows, you're out a year, 18 months sometimes. So that's maddening.
Yeah. Jerry?
When we designed our 2020 goals, one of the criteria we used was every goal could be achieved with existing technology and behavior changes, or existing and anticipated technology. In other words, we didn't want to design a goal where it was technologically out of reach. And so I agree with Chris. Everything, the technology is there or will be here soon enough, and we know what needs to happen with behavior, and we can make that happen without being coercive. But political will is always the barrier. And I'm blessed to work for a mayor who's been very, very supportive of our sustainability efforts and is a strong proponent of what we do. I can tell you, and I'm sure Gil would agree as a sustainability director, if your mayor or your city manager is not on board, you're not going to be successful. But he can't do everything. We rely on the state legislature, we rely on the national government, and we rely on other communities in our region. And so it can be frustrating because political will is usually the barrier, not lack of technology. But that's also what makes our job so exciting and so fun, because I don't have any line authority over anyone. I have to persuade people to do things, and that's a challenge, but it's also really fun when you succeed.
Well, that's a wonderful point. You have to use both real and perceived influence and authority to get people to move and to break through the institutional torpor that can exist, because we do have the answers, and it is a matter of the force of will. And again, listen to that Stevie Wonder song in the city. There's so much that we didn't cover. I mean, granted, I come from New York, and we have the best water in the country, so we didn't get to talk about water that much. We didn't get to talk about recycling that much. But what you got was a taste of what it can be. And let me tell you something. If this were easy, anybody could do it. And so what you saw is a taste of what you need. It's an art, and it's a privilege to have been able to speak with you guys. So thank you so much.